Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mastering Dungeons. You know me, I'm Shawn Merwin, and you know him, he's Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos, how goes it this week?
It goes great. If anybody hears chainsaws in the background, neighbors getting a tree taken down. Speaking of things that got taken down, Shawn, on
Mhm.
my list of like you are dead to me, which is a very small list, I had this Kickstarter for the Far West RPG, which kickstarted in 2011. 13 years later, this book has reached my hands, no longer being the longest overdue Kickstarter ever. Uh,
That's
Gareth
impressive.
Michael Skarka is the designer who has finally delivered. And it's funny because I can think about like my career at various points. I've been like, well, I'm doing better than Far West, and
Yeah.
and I don't mean to be mean about it, but they did take 13 years in getting me a book.
Yeah.
But they did. They got it. And that, kids, there's the lesson. If you try hard enough, one day you can.
You can deliver something 13 years late. That probably is a rule set that's no longer updated. It's a third edition game, right?
Yeah, yeah, it. I mean, I gave it a quick look. It looked interesting. I mean, the thing is that like when I bought it, when I backed it, I was thinking like, oh, next year I will run this with my friends, and we all agreed about how great that was. I don't even live in the same place those friends are anymore. Like, so it's just I don't know, but we'll see.
I think it's a sign that you're supposed to move back and run that campaign for them.
That's it. That's totally what I'm not doing.
But you did get to play a game this weekend, I've heard.
I did. I can't talk about it though. It was one of
Yeah.
those games.
Oh, that's sad.
Hmm.
That's sad. You did
But
play
I set up
Vecna?
a very pretty terrain. I made it. I made the playtest experience all that you could ask of it. The players came in and suitably were like, "Ooh," and I was like,
But I thought you played Vecna.
"Oh, that was during the week. I did. I played the
Ah,
Vecna prequel adventure. It was really fun on D20 Play. Tom ran that for us. Great DM that he always is. I found when I had a great time because I enjoy RPGs, as you know. But the adventure was okay. You know, it was suitable.
mhm.
It was fair, average, kind of like it had some nice things. You know, like it wasn't bad by any means. It just wasn't amazing. Um, and I think my biggest criticism, this is non spoilery, I think, is that at the end of it, you as a player may know, ooh, this is a big deal. Events related to Vecna coming. But as a character, nothing in the adventure tells you, whoa, this is such a big deal. You should be like ready to like, show me what can I do next to fight this threat? And instead it's like sort of like, Lord Neverember goes in, here's your gold for doing a thing, thanks. And I'm like, dude, we're talking about Vecna here. Like,
Mhm.
we have to whisper. It's the whispered one.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
no, it was just sort of treated like an everyday thing, and I that was the only design thing I wish they'd tweaked there is to really. I mean, they could have made it like sometimes their adventures you're just like, wow, that's an incredible adventure,
Mhm.
but they could have at least put a little bit there to make it obvious this is a big
Yeah.
deal.
Mhm. And pretty soon you'll be able to play the big deal because coming down the pike not too far from now is the full Vecna Eve of Ruin
Yeah.
adventure, which we are looking forward to.
And hearing of Ruin, or speaking of Ruin, I hear that you are doing something to hunt monsters.
That this is true. This weekend I got to play as well. I went up to Canada to the home of Mr. Joe Rosso
Yeah.
of Ghostfire Gaming, and he was running a game for his home group, and I got to sit in on that and
Nice.
play a Monster Hunter, which a fifth level Monster Hunter. Monster Hunter is a new class that we are designing at Ghostfire Gaming for future consideration. And if you want to hear more about it, there's a link in our show notes to the YouTube channel where Ben Byrne of Ghostfire Gaming talks about the concept of the Monster Hunter, what we're trying to do with it, what we've done so far. And then, so you can see all that. and then you can go to grim-hollow.com and you get a chance, if you so choose, to play test the Monster Hunter by becoming a VIP for
Ooh,
Grim Hollow. Yeah.
wow.
So yeah, it was fun. We're trying some new things. I don't want to get too deep into it. Maybe in a future episode, if we talk about designing classes or designing some of the crunchier, more important rules bits of D&D, we'll get into it. But for now, I will let Ben and the playtest itself tell the story. But we have a lot of stories coming in via our listener corner. So I want to thank those people out there who talk to us on our Patreon Discord, on YouTube, on Mastodon, on Blue Sky, on the flaming hellscape that is Twitter, in real life, at conventions, via email, or in our fevered imaginations. We're going to start via YouTube in Inaruk, who asked, Shawn, you mentioned you do more for backgrounds in your game. How do you make backgrounds meatier in 5e? And I wouldn't say I make them meatier in terms of rules, but what I try to do is make specific backgrounds for the campaign that I'm going to run, assuming that I'm not running a published adventure that already has backgrounds in them. That would also work, so I don't need to make them. So these backgrounds would introduce elements of the world, like or introduce tone, introduce themes of the campaign, or make specific connections between the characters and the campaign. Uh, if you think of convention games that you may have played or run, where you create the characters, pre-generated characters, to make the game immersive right from the start, you can do that using backgrounds without forcing the players to play a pre-gen that has a specific species or a specific class that they may not want to play. So you're just swapping out that idea of providing some material up front. You just put it in a background instead of in a pre-gen. Uh, so, for example, I have a convention one shot for the Aurora campaign called We All Fall Down. And in that campaign, I have pre-gens with connections to the NPCs and the setting built right in. All I'm doing with these other campaigns is doing that. And I'm taking, in this case, Aurora specific backgrounds and giving them that plus a few connections. Your mother lives in the same town as you and she's been ill. Just that sort of background that gives a little bit more of a connection. So it's part background and part backstory is how I usually handle it.
I dig that. My golden rule for backgrounds, in my opinionated way, is that I want the background to help the player engage with the material and have a reason why they can feel comfortable doing so, and they can ad lib or add things, based on what they might make up in their heads.
Mhm.
But to avoid the problem we often see in 5th edition, where it's presupposes information the player actually doesn't have. Right. So if I look at two contrasting things, right, like Tomb of Annihilation has two custom backgrounds, archaeologist and anthropologist. And both of them have an emphasis on discovering information, having answers to things like, hey, do I happen to know who lived in these ruins? And then the DM can say, yeah, so and so, right? It encourages you to do those kinds of interaction, which is great. It's exactly what you want, right? That you will participate and engage with the meat of what's there. Whereas, as we've talked about before, in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, an adventure I otherwise really, really love, the backstory of you work at the carnival is sort of presupposes so much you don't even know what to do as a character because you should know everything that you're experiencing. You literally work here. And so it's too much, right? It's like, and that's to me one of the big balances of backgrounds is to foster that engagement, but don't sort of occlude it or make the player feel like they almost can't play their character because it's such a disjointed experience.
Yeah. When we created the backgrounds for Acquisitions Incorporated, for that, the theme was we want to connect you to Acquisitions Incorporated without necessarily you being a part of Acquisitions Incorporated. So we wanted, since the adventure begins with you wanting to become a part or being given a not a, what's the opposite of a debrief? A briefing. Yeah, you're getting a briefing. So we want backgrounds that connect you. So there was the like plaintiff. You were suing Acquisitions Incorporated for
Right.
bodily
Yeah.
harm or something, and the settlement was, hey, come work for us.
Yeah.
Or you were the scion of a celebrity, i.e.,
Right.
one of Acquisitions Incorporated's charter members or one
Yeah.
of their right. You were a child and have always been in the background, and now you want to make your name. There was another a rival intern. You're
Yeah.
interning for another organization, and now you want to, either as a spy or because you were treated poorly at the other institution, want to come over here. So that's what we did with those backgrounds, to give that connection that was important
Yeah.
at the start of the campaign.
And they're great because those foster engagement, give you a hook, give you a fun thing to play off of, but they don't kind of create a weird knowledge disconnect at all. And I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's Inaruk. Thank you for the question. That's what I talk about when I meant making backgrounds meatier in the campaign. Next, we get via YouTube a question from Dan Rimo 826. Isn't adventure length an age or time of life thing? Back in school or uni, running massively long campaigns was the norm, but we could play multiple times a week or for full days at a time. I'm older now with kids, and scheduling is so difficult, so we often get like 2 or 3 hours a fortnight and on average, and the idea of a long campaign is just impossible. And we may be mixing up our definitions here. Uh, when sometimes people mean adventure when they say campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about the complete story that you tell during your run of adventures. And so while it can be harder to run a long campaign when you can only play short sessions infrequently, I don't see a direct correlation necessarily between the length or frequency of a game session and the length of the campaign itself. I am in a situation like you are describing here. We are lucky to play once a month. And even when we do, we may only get in 3 or 4 hours, but we are still playing a long campaign. Is it optimal? No. Is it sometimes hard to follow the threads that we've laid down? Absolutely. But it is still a long campaign. It is not a one shot that we then go off and do something completely different the next time. So that's what I meant when we said planning, when we talked about planning sessions and had that discussion. You can still do a long campaign. You just have to be able to uh, parse it correctly and reinforce the themes and the plot each time you start a new session.
I find kind of two interesting parts here. One is that kind of campaign versus adventure question, and
Mhm.
going back to sort of, what Matt Colville was saying, and, he's holding up adventures and then from the olden days, some of which actually are quite long. Then he's holding up like Curse of Strahd, and as much of Curse of Strahd was an adventure, it's a pretty meaty adventure even back in its day that took a long time to play, and it is now even bigger because now it's really more of a campaign. And
Right.
fifth edition often crosses that, what is an adventure, what's a campaign? I don't know. A long enough adventure is a campaign. A really short one is not, I guess, but
Mhm.
but a lot of those, even the classic ones, were really kind of campaigns, or they tied together to make campaigns. And
Mhm.
yeah, there absolutely is a thing, I think, where you are in your life dictates how much you can play, and so how much you can
Mhm.
get through, for sure. Right? I mean, I joke all the time that I'm going to go back to get a degree in anything just so I can play more RPGs, and just, yeah, I love that. I mean, I miss that dearly, just playing a couple times a week. Uh,
Mhm.
it was great, right? And even right out of college, I did some of that where I just played, 3 or 4 times a week. I would play Living Greyhawk. I mean, that was wonderful.
Mhm.
But so yeah, but I don't know that we can track to. I don't think anyone out there making RPGs is truly tracking the demographics of that, right? And you may have people who are reacting to it based on what demographic they happen to fall in, but I don't think anyone's publishing for a particular one.
Right.
It's for sure harder as you get older. I mean, scheduling is the number one enemy. The older and older you get, you've got a lot of requirements on your time, and it gets pretty darn hard. But at the end of it, you can still take on a big campaign and slowly go through it once a month, as you're saying, Shawn, every other week, every week, whatever. I ran Tomb Annihilation for 2 years, because I added more, and we took our time. We played every week mostly, and but it's still fun, and that doesn't mean I would have go with one shots instead,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that gets to the point. I'm sure Wizards of the Coast has some data on how often or how long do people play, and they can probably narrow it down and get aggregate data to figure out exactly how often and how long the median, mean, average, whatever term you want to use, player plays. But does that change how they would write adventures?
Yeah. And
I doubt it.
And a big factor, which Merrick Blackman brought up in his excellent blog post, is the spine width is what matters, right? For sales, like that is a big deal. It's why cereal comes in big boxes, as we said last time. Like you need that giant piece of marketing, and the spine is just big enough that you can have a big, bold title visible at a distance. You go smaller than that, and now you're in trouble because nobody can see what that product is. They have to now flip through. If you think of like buying comic books, right, where they're all in a giant bin and you have to know what you want to buy already to flip through it and find it. And they want to avoid that, right? And so not getting a bunch of little sales that is okay if you can get the bigger sales that you're actually able to market effectively and drive and make it appealing and interesting. And I think that's a lot of what's going on here. How do we know if that isn't working? You have to wait a long amount of time, because there's always a lag in changing strategies, and then see the change in strategies, right? So we can see that Wizards has not abandoned the model of the large adventure campaign. They have made it more frequent. And, then they may change away from that. They may find, well, maybe that's too frequent, or we're losing, our marketing thread or something like that. We'll see. I keep kind of feeling that way, but I don't know if that's true, right? We'll have to tell. It's hard to tell. Spelljammer's initial sales were huge despite many other releases that year. So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how it changes.
And there are short adventures out there. Just on Reddit today, I saw a post saying, I'm always playing, and there's always these long adventures that we can never get past the fourth or fifth session. I want short adventures work, and I get those, and I'm like, go on the DM's Guild. Adventures League, there's literally thousands of Wizards of the Coast sanctioned ones, and there's also thousands of fan-made ones that you could run for the rest of your life, and the 7 reincarnations of yourself could also play. And but then what happens? People are like, well, I don't want that. Or there's no theme, or right. And you can find people who are unhappy with everything that's offered, even if they're completely asking for it. So it's all out there.
The other question too that's behind all of this is the effort taken to write a certain thing. At some point, starting up, I think for a company like Wizards, starting up the project, getting all the things done, like that's a big amount of work. You don't want to do that 20 times a year, right? Because then you end up being actually quite inefficient at it. And a larger adventure can actually be more efficient. Where, yeah, sure, you have to read all those rules and stuff, but it's easier to do it for one project than for 5.
Yeah. Yep. So I think the best way to handle it as a DM or as a player is to say, hey, audience, hey, community, I want an adventure, published adventure that runs for 4 4-hour sessions. What can you suggest?
Yeah.
And you will get a ton of great suggestions.
Yeah.
I want a mega adventure. You will ask, and you will get a ton of great suggestions. Just reach out, because it's all out there. It's all waiting for you to play. Finally, we get a question from Shawn, Sean, not me, via email. We were all sitting around after a multiplayer session of Baldur's Gate 3, and it made me wonder, why don't they just adapt the most popular campaigns into games using Baldur's Gate Divinity Engine? The stories are already written. The NPCs are fleshed out. Isn't this a no-brainer? I give credit where it is due. Larian is great and did a badass job with Baldur's Gate 3. TTRPGs have stories and adventures on lock. I ask you because you seem tuned into the business side, which I assume is the only issue. I'm gonna step back and see if Teos has any thoughts on this.
I mean, I think one of the question is, are there agreement issues that would get in the way, right? Like, can Wizards of the Coast take the Larian Baldur's Gate engine and add more to it? They might not be able to, right? Larian said that when they thought about expanding on Baldur's Gate 3 and providing more, tie-ins and DLC, sort of additional adventures to it, they just weren't feeling the creativity behind it, and they decided they'd rather do their own game. Now, that could be the exact explanation. It could also be, I'm a little tired of working with Wizards, or the cut isn't as good as it is, or really what we want to do in our long-term strategy is X or Y. You never know. But at the very least, what they said, and if you take them at face value, is we weren't just feeling energized about it. So that means they're not feeling energized about taking Temple of Elemental Evil and putting it in the engine or whatever. And then the thing is also, well, you still have to do work, right? So like you've got lots of mindful errors, but if the story involves, I don't know, name a thing that's not in Baldur's Gate 3, well, now you got to 3D render it and get to work. And if the environment's different, and then the question of, if I'm reusing maps and reusing monsters and I just stick to that, are people happy enough with that, right? Is the dialogue and story enough, or do I need whole new maps and then you're talking about a lot of work, and who's going to do that work? And can it, if it's not Larian, can someone else do it per the agreement? If not, you need a new engine and you're back to square one. You might as well make it a new thing.
Yeah, this is sort of the same. It's a question that comes up a lot with people asking about creating adventures or creating worlds. And it's the idea. The story is the easy part. Everything that goes into turning that story, that idea, into its final product is the hard part. And sometimes having to be constrained by a existing story actually makes the process harder than it does make it easier, because we need to tweak this because in this engine that we're using, only this can work. And this adventure calls for 27 kobolds attacking, and we can only have 12 things on the screen at the time. I'm just making something up off the top of my head, but you get the idea. So sometimes it's just easier. This was done. This was done with Temple of Elemental Evil, right? Using the third edition rules. It's third edition, right?
Yeah.
Not fourth.
No,
third edition. And they tried to do a pretty honest and straightforward retelling of Temple of Elemental Evil in a video game form.
Yeah, no, they really went into the lore of it.
Yeah, I played it. I thought it was fine, but some people disliked it. I think they disliked it because of the bugs. But it was done. It was there.
Yeah. I just want to go back one thing you said. The story is easy. The story is easy, except what's hard about the story is making it fit all the other things, right? So like you might have coming up with a great story is great, but can the tech deliver on the story? Can the story come out properly with the assets that you're developing? The story can really fall apart, as we see in television show, right? Where you think, well, we'll do this scene, we'll do that scene, and that'll capture the story, but then it ends up being fragmented, right? Or it doesn't deliver properly. So, yes and no, right? The story can be hard because of the process around it of the project. And I've been on many a project where I couldn't properly contribute a good story because so many parts were moving, right? Or the bits of it were unclear, and that makes it a giant challenge. And that's true of this as well, is that you might have that, like, oh yeah, we're gonna do classic adventure ABC, but if we don't know how to build the engine around it, then it doesn't end up being great. It's tough. It's hard. I wish it weren't.
Yeah, and depending on the gameplay, a full a full even series of adventures may run in 10 seconds. Uh, right. If the gameplay, if it combat is fast, if it's not turn-based, and you just sort of hack your way through everything, what you think is a 16-hour adventure as you sit and role play turns into a 45-minute adventure when you're playing it as a computer game. So that's just one
Yeah.
more thing that gets in the way of using old stories, old adventures to port into a role-playing or a video
Yeah.
game.
And the Temple Elemental Evil video game was famously long because for
Mhm.
every character, you would not only choose an action turn based, but you had these dials you'd work with. Like, I'm going to
Mhm.
power attack for this amount and use that feat and the other thing. And boy,
Mhm.
you could go forever on this fight that really you should just hit the auto button and get through it.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, so many times you're 3 dials in and then you click the wrong button and you end up doing something completely ridiculous that you didn't intend to do. Yeah, it was a very complex game. Go back and check it out. We've got lots more questions, but we'll have to get to those next time because we need to get to our news and commentary section this week, starting with the D&D Fireside Chat. This was a YouTube video where Jeremy Crawford and Chris Perkins discussed where they are in the core 2024 book creation process. What did we learn? Well, we learned a few things. The player's handbook is currently in review, with all the members of the team reading through the book to identify any text changes that need to be made, and the layout was also being looked at.
That's exciting.
Uh, yeah, they discussed the art process and how the art is tied to the history, such as Melf's acid arrow being shown, cast by none other than Melf. Yes. Uh, what else did you take away from this video, Teos?
They really try hard again in this video to portray these as new books, right? Like, oh, you're going to be excited by the new spells and our new guidance. Chris Perkins calls it a UX improvement. And they say things that, when they say it, like they say it with the most glowing terms. And then I'm like, okay. Like, the rules for breaking an object will be in the player's handbook, not in the DMG. And I think to myself, okay. um, but they do say like the subclasses from Tasha's that they had said Tasha's and Xanathar's. We're rating it for parts so much. Those books will be reprinted, which I find fascinating to see how that will go. But as they're pulling subclasses from Tasha's to the player's handbook, they're then going through additional playtesting and refinement and improvement, some with new features. So yeah, that will be interesting, especially people who really love that sort of aspect of the game. They said the Brawler did not make it across, and it's replaced by the Psi Warrior because they wanted more psionic options. So now there's a real breadth of psionic options. And I thought to myself, what do you think about that, Shawn?
They've been avoiding psionics like mad, which then makes me wonder, why do you want to introduce them when they've been so problematic up to this point, when
Yeah.
they didn't get a thorough play test, did not get strong feedback, not just in terms of the rules, but in terms of if the players even want them. Uh,
Yeah, I
which
mean, that
makes
was
me wonder if there's
100%.
something coming that needs psionics to explain.
But yeah, I mean, and I still think the player's handbook to me is the core experience. And something I think 2014 did is that by and large, a few exceptions, it stayed to things that felt like they could be in kind of any movie, any novel. It was all very baseline stuff, exciting in its own way. And to have a bunch of psionic options seems like, wow, so many people don't like psionics. I would not have gone there, but they are going in there. Strap on. Um, what else? Jeremy has said it was kind of interesting. They had a couple of kind of personal angles that they shared. Um, Jeremy has a rule of no play testing in his home game so as to separate work from play. And Perkins shares his impressions of Gary Kahn's reminder of legacy and history and this sort of feeling of carrying the weight of being stewards of the brand. I thought that was interesting. Anything else you saw, Shawn?
It sounds like they're going to finally jettison race as a term and go with species, which makes sense. I think it's been a long time coming, and I was surprised to still see race in newer products occasionally up till this point, but I'm glad they're going to do that. And Chris talked about having art that sort of showed species doing things that they're known for. So for
Yeah.
the example he gave, I think, was halflings, sitting down and having a meal together. And I would, add like dwarves mining or, to that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Which is sort of like the way I thought we were saying, okay, I don't know. I guess I'm sort of a little confused. Not that I'm against that, but I think I look at it a little different than most people. Like I think it's games typecasting. I'm less concerned about that if we make it clear that breaking against type is fine. But it's sort of interesting to see, like, well, we're not going to call them, we're going to call them species, and you can be whatever you want. But we're definitely going to have those dwarves do some mining and
Yeah.
be together at the beard lacquering shop or whatever the art might be.
Right. It shows the complexity of not only the issues, social issues, but it shows the complexity of what the player base expects. And it's not just this sort of bioessentialism side of things,
Right.
it's the cultural side of things that you and I and many people understand that we don't want to pigeonhole people. We don't want to
Right.
stereotype people in real world. And how do you get away from that? You start by not doing it in your fantasy.
Right.
But exactly, it's such an ingrained thing that even the people who I've played with who would be very much opposed to any sort of stereotyping are like, oh, it's a tiefling, so therefore we polish our horns and do shady things. And it's like,
Right.
is it okay to carry it through in fantasy? And
Well,
there's so many opinions on that.
and also, if we don't tell the new player, hey, elves generally live in the forest, dwarves mine underground, they don't tend to like one another. If we don't say that, then are they just cosmetically different? Like what is the person who really comes in with nothing? How does that then why do we have these things, right? I think it was Keith Aman said on our Discord, sort of, are they all just humans wearing different faces, like different skins? Like at some point it becomes so, right. So there is that dance of what, because you do want to know, right? I mean, when you think about like all the worlds in Star Wars, right? Like one of the things that I wish they would show a little more is what is the culture of this place? What are they known for? And often what we get is actually a very tropish thing, right? We are warriors or whatever. But the more interesting things is when you can get those real glimpses of culture, society, whatever. And it's okay to say people vary from that, but give me something to play off of, because then it's fun. And I think countless gamers have had a lot of fun playing with and against tropes that then fuel those stories. And of course that has to be done carefully, but yeah,
right.
It's tough.
Yep. So that's there. They also had some videos on the upcoming Vecna adventure, including Mr. Perkins providing advice for DMs who run the adventure. Chris talked about whether he ever wishes that he could be surprised by adventures, since he either writes or oversees the creation of all of them. And what did Chris answer?
Yeah, he said no. He says, because I always change adventures, and he used the term kit bash them. And he expects the same of other DMs to take what they read and change it. And I thought that was really interesting, because I don't think that the 5th edition books read like something made for kit bashing. I also hear from a lot of DMs who actually, like, if I say something more often to DMs, it's, hey, don't take the words written on the page as sacrosanct. Do whatever you want and modify them. I think not enough DMs view that they can. Clearly, many do, but I think what I hear more than anything else is people feeling like, well, this is the way I have to run it because that's what's written. And like Merrick Blackman, right? Like I totally dig his blogs, and one of the things that I find is fascinating when he's recounting things is he runs as written, and then he'll say that was terrible, but he runs it that way and then says, boy, that was terrible. And I'm like, I would have just changed it. But, and there are lots of people that view it that way. And it's not a question of not being familiar with the game. It's like it's an approach. And so it was interesting to hear Perkins say like, oh yeah, like I don't mind being spoiled because I'm going to change it all up anyway. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is interesting. Speaking of interesting, Hasbro Q1 earnings call. I did not watch this because these sorts of things make me want to get the chainsaw that is going to be cutting down Teos's neighbor's tree and use it on myself. So, Teos, tell us all about Hasbro's Q1 earnings.
It's funny. I'm becoming better and better at understanding all these terms, but yet I'm still not going to invest in anything else other than a diversified, Vanguard type thing. So where are we? Hasbro Q1 in many ways at the top level, better than before. I mean, we've been sharing nothing but like the worst news, time after time. And it's still, revenue declined 24% for Hasbro. That is kind of not bad given how things have been before. And this is for the quarter, right? Not for the year. So that's important. That's why the number is like 757 million was made for the quarter. Toys were in line with expectations. Good. They weren't worse than expectations for the first time in a while. Wizards of the Coast saw higher operating profit with an operating margin of 38.8%. Consumer products, in contrast, so toy type stuff, was minus 11% operating profit. And this is after layoffs. So both of those numbers are after layoffs, right? Mm-hmm. The Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming segment is up 7%. And if you saw a lot of the news out there, you probably saw a lot of very confusing things. One of them being this number, because you can go, oh, D&D is doing great. Maybe yes, maybe no, because D&D publishing is bound up in all kinds of things. And Wizards of the Coast is Monopoly Go and Magic the Gathering and Baldur's Gate 3. And really what drove that 7% growth is Baldur's Gate 3 and Monopoly Go. And the reason that I'm going to tell you that the when they are looking at what's going to happen in the future, it's going to get worse, is because those two are going to get less popular over time. And those are the main engines driving that this 7% number will decrease. Looking at the Wizards of the Coast breakdown, they showed Wizards Tabletop, which includes Magic the Gathering, at plus 3%, 228 million for the quarter. Digital game licensing at plus 7%. Digital games minus 3%. And digital game licensing includes both Monopoly Go and Baldur's Gate 3. Revenue growth came from Magic, Baldur's Gate 3, and Monopoly Go. Broken record here. All of Tabletop, Paper, D&D, and Magic was up 3%. And when you kind of take apart the various numbers, what a friend of mine and I were able to kind of think is probably D&D Tabletop saw a minor decrease or stable, somewhere 0 to 2% down for the quarter. But it's really hard to parse these numbers. Take that with better than a grain of salt, but there is no line on the quarterly earnings that says this. But probably D&D, as we might think of it, non-video game type stuff, that is probably flat-ish. There was no mention at all of Cynthia Williams. They did mention some board member changes and thank them. They expect Wizards of the Coast and digital gaming to experience a -3 to -5% decline. Consumer products will be down more than that. Monopoly Go is now over $2 billion in lifetime revenue and 150 million downloads. So you think about what's on Hasbro's mind. It is not D&D paper publishing or 2024. It's how do we get another of those Monopoly Goes down there? Yep. And if not that, a Baldur's Gate 3. They talked about how they're working on more long-term D&D video games. They also discussed the partnerships with Lego, Converse, and Black Milk Apparel. And then they said a quote that I thought was interesting. Quote, "And stay tuned for more exciting innovations from our D&D team later this year as we continue to scale D&D Beyond and expand the richness of tabletop gameplay to digital." So something that would scale D&D Beyond further. I'm eager to hear what that might be.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I can't, from what I saw, I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I looked at reports afterward. All of what you said makes perfect sense.
Thanks. There was one other thing I want to say, Shawn, here, which is that there was a story on ICV2 about the Q1 earnings, and they threw in a line there saying, basically attributing whatever was going on to the OGL. And boy, if you needed a reason to say that ICV2, you just can't trust them further than you can throw them, it's this. Because there's absolutely no data in this report that said anything about the OGL. So anything you'd already be drawing a conclusion out of nowhere. There was no data, no quote, nothing says OGL. Also, we are a year away from the OGL. If you would have seen something for the OGL, you would have seen it a year ago on Q1 last year or Q2, and we didn't. And in fact, we have the book scan data from that time that showed very clearly no harm at all to the sales in these various stores. Maybe it slowed down in FLGSs. Maybe it slowed down, but other things made it go up. Possible, but we do see two very clear spikes in the book scan data, and it's the Super Bowl ad and it's the release of the movie.
Yep.
And if those things show spikes, we should have seen decreases too. We didn't. Sorry, ICV2. Maybe you hate Wizards for some reason, or the writer does, but you're just being wrong. And that got spread around a bit, which is unfortunate. Although I think at least Ian World pulled the mention, which is good. But yeah, no.
Yeah, I've heard so much data, both publicly and privately, of the OGL having practically no effect on anything to do with revenue they gained, subscribers to D&D Beyond, anything. So,
yeah, I mean, and I love the idea of the community rising and causing emphasis, which they did. We did. Yeah. Our complaints, our reactions did cause change. It's just not shown in the financial. The D&D is too big for that in a lot of ways, right? And as I've said before, people are still gassing up with Exxon, right? And they literally destroyed enormous portions of the environment and lied and cheated and countersued. Way worse scale, and everybody's, they're still an enormously profitable company, and people are still gassing up like nothing ever happened. Of course, that was in the 90s, so you can see how I hold on to things. But that's where we are. Is that this is not a thing that registered.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I'm surprised. Normally, if you would say there's a new edition coming, we would see sales plummet.
That's true.
And the fact that D&D is holding, the tabletop game, pen and paper game, book sales are still holding steady is
really good.
Is unfathomable that it's not just cratering with a new edition in the offing.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Well, Roll20 and Discord have been practically synonymous for years. And now, that partnership has been integrated, if you will. Roll20 is adding direct integration within Discord. So you can jump on a call in Discord, click the activity rocket ship icon, and find a new Roll20 option, which should automatically log you in to Roll20 if the same email is used for both accounts. Otherwise, you can just log in. The first person to launch picks which Roll20 campaign you're using. Then everyone else goes into a waiting room until the game master starts the game. I'm surprised this hasn't happened sooner.
Yeah, it's cool because I would guess that this required a deal with Discord, which is kind of neat, to get onto that little bar, and that's really neat. Well done, smart move by Roll20 to have that sort of integration, especially recognizing, it can be hard for companies to say we've got our own voice video chat. Yeah, people like Discord, that can be a hard conversation to have, and they did it, and they have provided what folks want, which is that making it even easier to integrate. That's smart.
Teos has been talking about getting new players into games, and Star Trek Adventures listened, or it might be vice versa. I don't know, but Star Trek Adventure 2E, we mentioned before that Star Trek, the role-playing game, is going to have a second edition, and they have now released a free 2E quick start guide. This ties to Teos's blog post last week, and you want to tell us more about this and your blog post.
Sure. Yeah. So it should be out to by the time you hear this, you'll see the blog post. Or you'll have seen the blog post, hopefully. And I blogged about how easy it is to try a new RPG. And one of the things I talked about is, hey, look for quick start guides, because when you see a 300-page book, like one of these puppies, it's super intimidating. But the actual rules that are in that book tend to be like a much tinier piece. And then when you get a quick start guide, it compresses it further. So the Start to Quick Start is a perfect example, and I just saw this in my inbox yesterday. It's 24 pages of rules and character info, right? Anybody can read that, followed by a short scenario called the Celestial Algorithm, and you got pre-gens, right? So you can read 24 pages in an evening, and the next day jump in with your buddies and have at it, right?
Mm-hmm. It looks like D&D Beyond is looking for a writer and or writers. We only know this because on Twitter, I don't even remember who the person was, but they're like, "Hey, you want to write for D&D Beyond? Give us a link or give me a link to your work as a reply to this tweet." And so people, a few people had questions, and other people gave a reply to the tweet. I gave a link to the 10 episode or 10 what's the word I'm looking for?
Post.
10 post blog that I did on writing adventures, saying, "Hey, I'll work for $350 per assignment."
Yeah. I mean, so it was Michael Galvis, which you can find, unfortunately, only on Twitter, which is, to me, I mean, LinkedIn's already terrible, but Twitter is a worse LinkedIn than LinkedIn, if you ask me. It's such a strange place. And in fact, one of the things I enjoyed was reading all the responses. And someone wrote like, "Yeah, I guess I could do this." And then you have, some super accomplished person like you saying like, "Hey, I've written for D&D Beyond before, talk to me." I just thought it was such an interesting, this could have been a blog post. This could have been an email. This could have been a formal announcement call for writers. And Matt Colville has shared before where he said, I forget what medium he used, it might have been YouTube, where he said, like, "Hey, send me your submissions. We're looking for writers." And then he spent like, forever going through them. And it was the most painful process for him to try to honor the fact that he'd said, "You send me stuff, I'll look at it." And he changed how he approached things after that. But it is a good assignment if you think that you have the chops to write this kind of content, quickly at high quality. You can do so. A couple folks asked me, what I thought about this, and well, A, I'd say hire Shawn, but B, if you're interested, what I would look at is like our recent coverage of the types of articles they've been writing. And some of the better ones have been, and they just put another one like the one we mentioned last week out, where they, for D&D maps, they do a nice job of giving a combination of here's functionality in maps, and here is how to run this adventure better, all in one post, in a way that kind of entices you into owning that content, running it on maps, using all of the technology. Like that's a pretty sweet combo where you're speaking to both the product and the product, right? The digital product and the paper product.
Yeah. Well, if it's any consolation to folks out there, I have not received a response yet. So as far as I can tell, the offer's still open out there.
Fools.
Finally, we get to our creator corner, and we're going to look this week at Nerdburger Games offering Hypersleep Terminated. Craig Campbell of Nerdburger Games is crowdfunding this GM-less RPG where you are in space and everything goes wrong. Quote, "You awaken from hypersleep to the computer telling you there's a problem. There sure is. You know your name, but you can't remember much else about yourself. So you develop your character as you play the first few scenes."
That's sweet.
So it's a short play, GM-less role-playing game where players portray characters in a space disaster movie. and a lot of you are going to die. It's just a matter of how dramatic you can make it. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it sounds great. I love the idea that you can't quite remember yourself because you're just waking up from hypersleep. So you're going to develop things as you play. And that if you die, which, as they said, a lot of you are going to die, you become a producer on the movie. So you're now like influencing the story as it plays out, right? So very kind of alien kind of concept. Well, you died. So now you get to help direct the action that the rest of the players are going through. Yeah, I think that's really neat. Like it ends May 16th. Fun, cheap pickup.
Yep. And Craig is a great designer and a really cool person. So you should definitely check out this Hypersleep Terminated from Nerdburger Games.